In our previous section, we talked about how outdoor air pollution and various major types and sources exist. In this section, we're going to be looking instead at indoor air pollution. It may surprise you to learn that indoor air pollution poses greater risks to people's health than outdoor air pollution. There are several reasons why this is the case. Indoor air pollution contains higher concentrations of toxic pollutants than outdoor air, and we'll talk about some of the indoor air sources of those pollutants in just a moment. Also, most people tend to spend more time indoors compared to outdoors, and so they end up getting higher levels of exposure because of this. And finally, poor ventilation in many buildings can cause pollutants to remain concentrated indoors and exacerbate exposure levels. The sources of pollution found indoors can be very wide ranging. They can include pollutants from building materials like asbestos, chemicals used to press wood, household products that contain VOCs or other toxic pollutants, dust and dust mites, dander, mold and mildew, emissions from gas stoves like carbon monoxide, smoke if you smoke indoors. Indoors pollutants can also come in from the outside. One example is radon. Radon is a radioactive gas produced when the uranium in rocks decays through natural processes. So, if you live in an area where there are known uranium deposits, then radon gas can seep up into the home and accumulate. So, home radon testing is an important measure to regularly carry out if you live in one of these regions. There are many regions that this occurs throughout the United States. It's also important to note that there is a big difference between which sources of indoor air pollution presents the greatest risks here in the US and other industrialized countries versus in less affluent countries that are still industrializing. In industrialized countries like the US, the most acutely harmful indoor pollutants are cigarette smoke and radon. However, in less industrialized countries, the most harmful indoor pollutants are byproducts of burning fuel for cooking and heating the home, because often the fuels that are burned are not very clean sources and can include wood, charcoal, and crop waste. The NIH estimates that indoor air pollution is the cause of 2 million deaths in developing countries, and that a disproportionate effect of this falls specifically on women in developing countries, as they are often the ones tasked with cooking and therefore end up with higher exposure to these fuel byproducts. So, what are the health impacts of being exposed to air pollutants? Well, short term acute exposure can cause some immediate effects, including eye, nose, and throat irritation, headaches and dizziness, and fatigue. But there are also these long term effects of an extended exposure, and these can bring about conditions in a wider range of body systems. Respiratory disease, meaning diseases of the lungs, as well as cardiovascular disease, meaning diseases of the heart and circulatory system, are known to be caused and worsened by air pollution. There are also less obvious ones. Air pollution affects the brain and has consequences for learning ability, memory, and behavior. Exposure to certain pollutants has also been linked to cancers, and it has also been linked to reproductive health dysfunction. Of course, the likelihood of any of these chemical caused health conditions manifesting depends on several factors. It depends on the level of exposure a person experiences, the number or frequency of their exposures, their age, because people who are elderly and also children are both more susceptible, and the presence of pre existing medical conditions and comorbidities that can make a person more susceptible. And then there is also individual sensitivity of each individual person. Just as different people can experience different allergies, they can also experience different levels of sensitivity to various pollutants. The research on health effects of air pollution is so extensive, and a comprehensive exploration of it is well beyond the scope of what we're learning in this course. So, we are just going to limit our discussion to the six criteria pollutants that we covered in the previous section and summarize the health effects of each. Exposure to the ground level ozone is known to cause decreased lung function, coughing, and shortness of breath. For people who have asthma, it aggravates their condition, and it's known to cause an increased need for medical treatment and increased admission to hospitals. Exposure to particulate matter in the short term can aggravate heart and lung diseases in people who have these as a pre existing condition. But exposure in the long term can actually cause these conditions to manifest. Exposure uh, can lead to damage of the nervous system, and children are particularly susceptible. It causes IQ loss, learning disability, memory difficulties, and behavioral difficulties. In adults, it is known to damage the cardiovascular system and the kidneys. Nitrogen dioxide aggravates cases of lung disease. It also makes people more susceptible to catching respiratory infections and weakens your defense against pathogens. High levels of nitrogen dioxide has been shown to increase hospital admissions for respiratory conditions. Carbon monoxide, as we said before, reduces the concentration of oxygen traveling to the body's organs and tissues. This aggravates cases of heart disease and leads to increased hospital admission rates for people experiencing cardiovascular symptoms. And then lastly, sulfur dioxide aggravates lung diseases and cases of asthma, especially among children.